All right. Awesome, guys. Hopefully, you got some good gratitudes. You got your intentions put down for yourself. And man, hopefully, this gets you off to a start of a really, really awesome, outstanding day. So, hey, here's what I want to do today. So, for the last, I don't know, few months actually, as I have gone through and been doing morning ascent, and as we go through and we do that Napoleon Hill self confidence formula, we do the 12 steps to the summit of success, and then we do the opening affirmations. As we've gone through and done that, I just keep having this thought of like, okay, for me, I have been chanting that now on a fairly regular basis for over 5 years now. And for in that 5 year period, for probably the first at least 3 years, it was every single day I was there doing it. And I would just say, and especially for the last 6 months since COVID hit, I think I have only missed two morning ascents that I have not been a part of. Well, as we go through and do that, I just have been like, okay, we go through and we chant that every day, but do we really stop and take the time to think about it? And I've mentioned that to you guys a few times of make sure that you're paying attention to what you're saying. Well, here's what I want to do today, at least at the start, and we'll see where we go. But I want to go through and I want to talk to you about, I'm going to pull up that self-confidence formula again here. And I want to go through and talk about it with you. So, and really have you stop and think about what is it that we're saying and why. Now, remember the idea of this, Napoleon Hill wrote down, or excuse me, wrote the book, Think and Grow Rich. And just so that you remember what happened is Andrew Carnegie had told him, he wanted him to go out and interview all of these top successful people and to figure out what is it that they do and how is it that they work, meaning how is it that they work inside that creates this success for them. And so he did that. And then he put together this book. Well, in the process of putting together the book of Think and Grow Rich, he then came up with this self-confidence formula. And as part of the book, and as you know, at the very end of it, we're saying, I sign my name to this formula. I will sign my name to this formula and commit it to memory and repeat it aloud once a day with full faith that it will gradually influence my thoughts and actions. Well, so he's saying if you want to be successful, you should commit this to memory. So I guess my first question for you is, have you committed it to memory? See, part of what I would tell you that I have noticed, and I am speaking for me, I'm not speaking for everyone else, but I thought I had it committed to memory before COVID hit and we started doing this all by ourselves. Because what would happen is we would come together and meet in this training room that I'm in, and there would be somewhere in the neighborhood of, anywhere from 15 to sometimes 40 people in the room. And we would go through and we would chant this. And I felt like, oh, I've got it committed to memory. Well, the first time that I had to do this all by myself, where I stood up and did it, I realized pretty quickly maybe I didn't have it as committed as I thought. So we kind of just go through the motions is the point. So here's what I wanted to talk about today is I want to go through and dissect this just a little bit with you guys and talk about and have you think about, ultimately, this is the question for you. Are you doing the things that this talks about? Have you applied it in your life? So the first thing he says on here is, I know that I have the ability to achieve the object of my definite purpose in life. Therefore, I demand of myself persistent, continuous action towards its attainment, and I here and now promise to render such action. So, for two key things in that. First one is, do you know that what your definite purpose in life is? See, the reason that George spends so much time going over and over again, know where you're going, know where you're going, know where you're going, is because that is the first key piece of this. So Napoleon Hill is saying, I know that I have this definite purpose in life. And then the second part of it is on this is he's saying, I know that I have the ability to achieve it. See, that's the most important piece of this in my mind is right off the bat is, do you know what it is? And do you believe you have the ability to achieve that definite purpose in your life? Do you really know it? And do you believe it? See, here's the thing. As I stop and think about this, and you think about the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, in the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, they don't have the ability to decide what they want to do. Now, somebody might argue that a little bit of, oh, they can decide if they want to go this way or that way. But ultimately, stop and think about it for a minute. If I'm a dog or I'm a cat, I can't really just decide, hey, I want to go to Hawaii, so I'm going to figure out how I could get there. Now, that's not the way that it works for them. But thankfully, we are not an animal, a dog or a cat. We're not a tree that's been planted and that's just where it is. Thankfully, that's not how it is. See, we have the ability. You are much stronger than you think you are. You have the ability to accomplish so much more than you really recognize if you know where you're going and you have that definite purpose in life. So, do you have that definite purpose that you have set for yourself? And if you haven't, then I would recommend for you, that's the first thing that needs to take place is you have got to come up with what is that definite purpose in your life. And then he says, I demand of myself persistent, continuous action towards its attainment. See, and we put it in all caps there. Demand of yourself that you're going to do that. Put that together as the plan that, hey, this is what I'm going to accomplish, and I have the ability to do it. Whether you really believe that or not, and I think that's the problem, is most of us down inside think, well, I don't know, that works for people like so and so, but it doesn't always work out for me. I was talking to my sister yesterday. She called me up. We're supposed to be closing on a condo for her tomorrow. She called me up yesterday because the person living in the condo is a tenant. And they were given their notice. They were on a month to month. So they were given their 30-day notice. They're supposed to be out. And my sister called me and just says, I just know they're not going to be gone because that's just how things work out for me in my life. See, do you really think that way? Because if you do, we got to change it. And that leads to the second piece of this. The second thing Napoleon Hill says in here, I realize the dominating thoughts of my mind will eventually reproduce themselves in outward physical action. Now, here's the thing. Think of it this way, and hopefully you guys can see this as I'm drawing on the board here. Who you are as a personality, 10% is conscious, 90% is unconscious. So when he says this, I realize the dominating thoughts of my mind will eventually reproduce themselves into outward physical action and gradually transform themselves into physical reality. The thoughts that we are having in our mind, because of the way the conditioning and the wiring that is in place, the thoughts that we have in our mind do eventually reproduce themselves into outward physical action. See, if you notice people who you would term as lucky, they tend to be very positive thinking people. They aren't thinking negatively. See, they don't do that. And as a result, because the dominating thoughts of our mind, the things that are down here in the unconscious, that's where this comes into place. What happens is that eventually reproduces itself into an outward physical action. And that is what he's talking about here. So he says, therefore, I'm going to concentrate my thoughts for 30 minutes daily on the task of thinking the person I intend to become. See, one of the things that I would recommend that you do that I know most of you are not doing this, is take the time to sit down and write in a journal about this stuff. Stop and think about it and write it down. See, I think the reason that you guys like to listen to George so much and the reason that he is where he is at is how often do you hear him talking about grabbing his journal, going up into the mountains, sitting down on a rock, and just starting to write? See, there is magic in that I think we miss, that if we would stop and take the time to really think about this, what are the dominating thoughts of my mind? Because they're going to reproduce themselves into outward physical action and they're going to transform themselves into physical reality. See, when my sister said to me, well, I just know that something bad's going to come out of this. Well, yeah, what ends up happening is we create that in this unconscious part of our mind. There's a book that I read, and I didn't enjoy the book. In fact, I don't even know if I finished the book, to tell you, that's how much I'm not sure I enjoyed it. But there was one part of this book that actually I learned a ton from. And the name of the book is The Secret Codes of Success. And basically what this guy said is this, and this part of the book I loved, but it was only this part. The rest of it, I was kind of like, yeah, I can't even get into it. But here's what he said, is that basically what happens is, remember I said here, 10% of who you are is conscious. The other 90% is unconscious. Now, I am not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. However, my daughter-in-law graduated from med school and is now on her path to becoming a psychiatrist. Therefore, I'm qualified to talk to you about this. No, I'm not. But here's what I know is 10% of who we are is conscious, 90% is unconscious. And now, if you couldn't tell, I'm a little bit proud of my daughter-in-law that she is a doctor. I always thought my son would be a doctor because he was smart enough, but instead he married one. So I guess that's second best. I don't know. All right. 10% of who we are is conscious. What he said is this, is the reason that this stuff happens, where this outward physical actions transform themselves into physical reality, is because what happens is this. We ask ourselves questions here in this 10%. We ask ourselves questions. See, my sister, when I told you that she is saying, well, I just know that this tenant's not going to be moved because that's the way my life works. See, what she was manifesting, what she was telling me is she asks herself questions up here, that what happens is it gets down into the unconscious, and then it becomes basically this self-fulfilling prophecy, because of what happens is this. So in this book, The Secret Codes of Success, what this guy said, and I can't remember the guy's name. I mean, I really did not enjoy the book, but I love this piece. Is what he said is, we ask ourselves questions, and when you ask yourself a question, the unconscious then goes to work on answering that question. So if you ask yourself a question of, why do bad things always happen to me? And not that that's the exact way my sister was saying it, but essentially what she's asking herself is why do these things happen, or why do certain things happen? And what happens then is our unconscious mind goes to work on answering the question. So when you ask yourself a question that maybe there's not an answer to necessarily, or you're saying, well, why do I always leave so late? Well, what happens then is your unconscious brain goes to work on figuring out a way to show you this is why. So part of what he's saying here is, I realize the dominating thoughts of my mind. See, the dominating thoughts of your mind, if you're asking yourself questions that are negative, that are holding you down, or why is this happening? What's going to happen is your brain goes to work to figure out why. Now, let me give you an example of that. For me, I got a concussion when I was in high school. I was pole vaulting. So what happened is I was on track and decided in junior high that I liked pole vaulting. So in high school, I'm doing it. And it's after school one day. We're out at the track behind the high school. I get running with the pole. I go and I go over the bar. Well, I got a little bit more flex in the pole than what I had typically done, and it shot me a little bit further. So I cleared the bar and I landed on the mat, but I landed on the very back of the mat and I fell down. Well, as I fell off the mat, I hit my head. Well, I got a really bad headache, and I went to the coach and I said, Coach, I got a really bad headache because I missed the mat. And he said, well, why don't you just go home then? So I go into the locker room of the gym, and I go to my locker and I can't remember the combination. Well, my mom worked at the school. She was the attendance secretary, which, by the way, most of the time people would say that's got to be horrible to have your mom be the attendance secretary. It was the best thing ever, because I could walk down the hall and see the principal, and the principal would go, hey, Russ, because in his mind, I would never slough a class, which I never did, of course. But in his mind, I would never slough a class because my mom was the attendance secretary and she would know. Well, my mom would say, I don't care if you slough, I'm just not going to give you a note. Well, I learned really quickly that the teachers knew my mom was the attendance secretary and would just automatically mark it as excuse. So anyway, total side note there. So I go to my mom's office as the attendance secretary, and I say to her, hey, Mom, I missed the mat. I got a headache, and I went to get my stuff out of the locker. I couldn't remember the combination. She says, great, go get the rest of your stuff out of your locker. We'll go home. So I go up to my hall locker in the school, and I get to the locker and I can't remember the combination. Well, as a result of that, I go back to my mom's office and I said, I still can't remember the combination of that. And she says, all right, we're going to the doctor. So the doctor's office was just down the street from the high school. We drive down to the doctor's office, and he basically says, you got a concussion. And so he tells my mom a few things to keep an eye on. We go home, I go to bed, wake up at 2:00 in the morning. I run up and I wake my mom up at 2:00 in the morning. Mom, I remember my combination. So I was like excited. But here's the interesting thing. Since then, I have had this belief. So my point of that whole story, since then, I have had this belief that I remember phone numbers. I remember numbers. I could tell you my home phone number from when I was a kid. I could tell you my neighbor's home, but 2 of my neighbor's phone numbers. I could tell you my friends' phone numbers. Like, I just remember numbers. But I have had a hard time remembering people's names. Well, part of that is this. I would ask myself for the last, I don't know how many years, at least 20 or 30, I have asked myself, how come I'm so bad at remembering names? Well, see, if I ask myself, how come I'm so bad at remembering my names, my unconscious goes to work to help me figure out why. And then what happens is I don't remember names. So I changed that around. And here's the interesting thing is I started asking myself this question. Why am I so good at remembering people's names? And now your unconscious then goes to work on figuring out why you are good at it. Now, here's what's interesting. If you will take on this challenge and do this, if you will really take the time to stop and ask yourself some questions, to change it around, take the questions that you're asking yourself that are negative, that are causing you to not achieve the things you want, and turn them into the questions that will get you there. See, I turned it around to why am I so good at remembering people's names? Well, what happens then is all of a sudden you're from the unconscious, it starts popping up the reasons why you're good at doing those things. And that's how we change it. See, the dominating thoughts of your mind are going to eventually reproduce themselves, which leads into the third piece, which is I know through the principle of auto-suggestion, any desire I persistently hold in my mind will eventually seek expression through some practical means of attaining the object back of it. See, whatever we hold in our mind is going to come about. Now, this auto suggestion that he's referring to came about actually by an apothecary, a lady by the name of Emily Couillet. Hopefully I'm saying that. I don't know, some French lady, and I don't speak French, so that's the best you're going to get from it. But basically, what she said is it's to some extent it's this placebo effect, where basically we're shaping, rewiring this unconscious part of the brain. So when he's talking about this auto suggestion, that's what I'm referring to is asking yourselves questions that are going to get you towards where you want to be, not holding you back from it. Well, then he goes into number 4, which is I have a clearly written down description of my definite chief aim in life. Do you have that? Do you have it written down as your definite chief aim in life? If you want to see an interesting one, go and look up, and you can Google this, look up Bruce Lee definite chief aim or chief aim, and it tells the story about Bruce Lee of how he decided he wanted to become this actor doing martial arts. And look at what happened to him. He created this whole industry of this movies where he is the movie star in these actors doing martial arts. I lost the word for a minute. They're doing martial arts. All right. So have you written down your definite chief aim in life and committed that I am never going to stop trying until I've developed the confidence to do it? Well, how we develop the confidence is what I was talking about here, is asking yourself, why am I able to do it? Well, then the fifth thing that he talks about here is that he realizes no wealth or position can long endure unless built upon truth and justice. The thought that always comes to my mind when I see that is these people who go and win the lottery, that win hundreds of millions of dollars. No wealth or position can long endure unless built upon truth and justice. See, those people end up broke because of, and I'm not saying this to be mean or negative, but it's because of who they are. They have not become the person who can have that money. So what ends up happening is it goes away. See, no wealth or position can long endure unless it's built upon truth and justice. Therefore, I will engage in no transaction which doesn't benefit everybody whom it affects. See, look for a win-win. Don't look for a win-lose. Too many times when we're negotiating, we're trying to do a win-lose. But what Napoleon Hill's talking about here is that these people who were successful went out and they were looking for transactions that would benefit everyone that's involved, not just themselves. Now, he says, I will succeed by attracting to myself the forces I wish to use. See, we attract it by asking these questions. No different than my sister attracting the negative and the bad. We attract it to us by asking the right question, turning things around and doing it that way. Then he says, I'll induce others to serve me because of my willingness to serve others. The story John told this week about Anthony in New York City. Essentially, all he did was he induced that guy to serve him because of his willingness to serve him, to meet what he was talking about. Then he goes on to say, I will eliminate hatred, envy, jealousy, selfishness, cynicism. I don't know why we have such a hard time saying that word. But here's the thing. Obviously, we know what hatred is, envy, jealousy, selfishness, but cynicism. I looked up this morning because I was like, I want to make sure everybody understands what cynicism means. Meaning, I think we know what it is, but here's the interesting thing of it. When I looked it up, it says it's an inclination to believe that people are motivated purely by self-interest. So cynicism is our inclination to believe that everyone else out there is motivated purely by self-interest. But that's not true. Everyone is doing the best that they know how. And we've got to change that thinking from the negative about people into, you know what, they're just doing the best that they know how, and their life experiences, the circumstances that they have had, is what has created them to be where they're at, and they would do better if they knew how. That's why he says, by developing a love for all humanity. See, that's ultimately what we all need to do, is develop this love for humanity. Stop looking for reasons to be upset. Just for whatever reason, and I think I shared this recently, on the freeway, thought I had plenty of room, put on my blinker, went over, the guy behind me flipped me off, and he did it for literally, I'll bet you, a mile at least, maybe not, maybe even 2 miles, that he was flipping me off the entire time. Well, I felt like there was plenty of room. It was not, it really, I would do it again today because I thought there was enough room. See, that's not having a love for humanity. That's having a hatred for humanity. And unfortunately, there is too much of that going on today in our world, and we need to change it. So, but we can't change everybody else, but I can change me. So change that, because a negative attitude towards others is never going to bring you success. And then finally, I will cause others to believe in me because I'll believe in them and myself. See, believe in other people, believe in yourself. See, now hopefully you guys have maybe learned something or thought about this a little bit more. As we go through and do this on a daily basis, stop and think about, how do you need to apply that? And how can you change some of these things that are in this hard wiring that have been there for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years for some of us, that are hardwired in this unconscious. Well, we can change the wiring, and you have to do it by asking yourself a better question. And usually the question why is a very powerful question, but you got to use it in the right way, because it can be destructive. The reason it can be destructive is, how come I'm so horrible at this? Why am I always doing this? See, asking yourself the negative is going to just bring the negative. But if you'll ask it and turn it around, the why, into a positive. Why am I so good at remembering people's names? Why do I love prospecting? What if you asked yourself that today? Why do I love getting on the phone and making phone calls? Watch what happens if you will consistently keep asking yourself the question. You'll have some calls that you're like, that's why I like doing this, is because people love and appreciate my help from them. All right. Well, hey, if you, this would be a point where we were in person. I'd say thoughts, comments. What do you guys think? So I would love to see in the chat box your thoughts or your comments on what you're going to change. What are you going to do differently to help apply this to you in your life? I challenge you to go out and just change some of this. Stop and think about it a little bit more, of how can you implement this into your life to create a scenario where you're having the success and accomplishing that definite chief aim in your life, or your purpose. All right. I shouldn't have closed all that off apparently here, but let me get it pulled back up here.